Now apparently living in a time where the woke feel the need to rewrite children's literature classics to fit with the social mores of the day and remove all the offensive and mean language that's no longer politically correct, including classics by Roald Dahl, the classic children's author who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, BFG, James and the Giant Peach, and more. I mean, I remember those. Those are classics. I read every single one of those books as a kid.
Yeah, I didn't even know one author was responsible for all of those, so we started putting this story together, and that is quite the body of work. These are stories that have been admired for decades. They are widespread, very beloved, and I also consumed all of these and don't remember anything coming to light that would be so problematic, right? There's some books that I read as a kid where I'm like, yeah, I could see, times have changed and like there might be some questionable themes here, but these do not come to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I could at least understand the argument if we were talking about like the N-word and Huckleberry Finn and maybe just like not putting that. I'd actually probably lean towards leaving it as is and explaining the historical context, but at least I could hear that argument. The things we're talking about in these books that are being censored are ridiculous. Almost any reference to like women or femininity is being removed and replaced with gender neutrality. And then like there's a lot of one of the tropes of Roald Dahl's like literature is lots of like the bad characters are like fat and grotesque. Like the bad guys are like very physically unappealing. And so there's lots of like very literature language about the fatness of the characters that's been removed out. So let's just go through this list. Matilda, in the original edition, it had mothers and fathers. That's now been cut and replaced by parents, because some parents might be neither mothers nor fathers. They might be they-thems, I guess, or something. This next one, I guess it was ableist. It says, your daughter Vanessa, judging by what she's learnt this term, has no hearing organs at all. Like no ears, like she can't listen, I guess. And now they've removed that. They said, I guess that was ableist. It gets worse here.
So I'm reading what they changed it to, and they say, judging by what your daughter Vanessa has learned this term, this fact alone is more interesting than anything I've taught in the classroom. Like they completely changed the meaning of that sentence.
Yeah, completely.
Okay. And then it looks like also Matilda, they had a phrase turning white, and they changed that to turning quite pale because you're not allowed to be white anymore.
You're not allowed to say white, like, turning pale, like, or being shocked or looking scared, you turn white, right? Oh my goodness.
No turning white. That is hilarious. The plain, plump person with the smug suet pudding face. And they changed this to the plain person with the smug pudding face. You can't say plump.
Plump is too problematic. Why are you being a bigot?
Wow. That is just...
The next one cracked me up because, as you'll see, most of the censorship was removing references to like women that are either neutral or negative. But they actually changed 8 nutty little idiots in the original to 8 nutty little boys. So they made it gendered when it wasn't before because it was because it's okay if it's anti-boys, I guess, is the
you can hate men.
Yeah.
Of course. That's always acceptable. It's just one thing that's really interesting to me as we're already progressing through this is how, isn't it more offensive to erase the use of the word plump? Like you're not allowed to be plump. You're not allowed to be fat. Like it's
what
almost
happened
like
to fat positivity? Huh?
Yeah. Like what's wrong with, if there's nothing wrong with being plump, what's wrong with saying that somebody's plump? It doesn't track for me at all. All right. The next book, this being targeted is James and the Giant Peach. And in 2001, there was a phrase in this book that said queer ramshackle house. Can't say queer anymore. So now it says strange ramshackle house.
But it wasn't even saying queer in the gay sense. Like the original definition was strange or odd. But there's multiple definitions of the word. It's not like they were saying like, hey, you queers or something. And I would actually argue you should probably keep that in and then explain the context. But that's not even what we're talking about. They're saying you can't use under like,
well, so it's a house. Like, how could a house possibly be like gay queer?
You don't know the house's identity, Hannah. Come on, don't be them, they, them,
Right.
phobic,
Should
whatever.
definitely have checked for pronouns first. But no, these are basic definitions of words. Queer has an actual meaning in the dictionary, and that meaning has not changed just because it was used as a optic within the LGBTQ community and like taking possession of it when it was. Anyways, I don't have to explain this history to people. Like, obviously, queer was used to describe people who were gay because queer meant off and weird, and it was an insult. But then they sort of took that word, took power back over it. But it doesn't mean that the word itself means anything other than being odd or different. And I think you, again, give power back to the old use of it when it was being used derogatorily, when you act like queer itself is just a bad word now. Because if queer is not a bad word and being queer is not a problem, then queer should be left in the
And even
Senate.
if it is a bad word, like, I hate this idea that rather than explain the context and, help them understand what life was like when this book was written, which was in the 20th century, we're going to instead like erase history and pretend it was never said at all. Like, that's crazy to me. And then in James and the Giant Peach, there are these characters called the Cloud Men. And I'm not going to include all the examples, but throughout the entire book, they changed Cloud Men to Cloud People. Cloud People. Like, is this, I would love to know. Please find me the women out there who were feeling erased and harmed by the fact that they were not included in Roald Dahl's Cloud Men in James and the Giant Peach. Find one person for whom that was even on their radar as a problem, and I'll let you have it. But I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can find a single person victimized by the use of the word cloud men.
I mean, can anybody be gendered in history and in the literature? Can James even be a boy in this story anymore? I don't understand the agenda at all. It's to absolutely erase identity. It's to make language drum and boring and mundane, and really to get rid of so many depictions. It makes everything less rich. And this is actually what pisses me off about this philosophy, is that across the board, it is something that just makes your life worse. It makes life more gray, more mundane, have less meaning, have less like description and beauty. And that's true in this sort of frame. It's also true in like the fact that it makes you physically poorer. Everything about this philosophy is one that erodes the standards of life that we currently have. I can't stand it. Who started this? Who was sitting in their room and thought, you know what we need to do? We need to go edit these children books. How much time do you have on your hands to possibly be concerned or even think to do this?
So I actually think I have an answer to that. They
I would love
partnered
it.
with a quote unquote sensitivity reading business. So there are now in children's fiction, young adult fiction, etc., there are sensitivity readers who, for the modest costs of, I'm sure they're exorbitant rates, will come in and read your draft and fix it so it's inclusive. So it's become a massive
The grift.
They
Yeah.
partnered with some organization whose inclusivity readers came in and rewrote this classic author's works. I mean, that to me is a disgrace. He should be rolling over in his grave. But we've also got some from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So, like, they took out a reference to a 9-year-old boy who was enormously fat and just said he was just enormous. I'm assuming that's Augustus Gloop, and the whole point of his character is that he's really fat. So
So I remember this character, Mike Teavee. He's a little boy that dresses like a cowboy in the movie. Himself had no less than 18 toy pistols of various sizes hanging from belts around his body, and every now and again, he would leap up into the air and fire half a dozen rounds from one or another of these weapons. That was removed.
they took out the toy pistols. You can't have toy pistols. They took out the toy pistols from the book.
Just gone.
They're not even real pistols. They're toys.
He's dressing like a cowboy and firing the pistols like this is his whole character shtick, and they just have to remove it. I mean,
Gun's bad.
that cracked me up. And
So-
also, it's so silly because I know as a kid, like, we ran around toy pistols all the time playing cops and
those
robbers.
little, like,
And
firecracker guns that would
Yeah.
pop guns and everything. Kids have airsoft guns, and you're saying they can't have toy pistols in a children's book. Give me a break. I mean, kids have like $300 replica airsoft rifles now. Now, this next one is really interesting. So in the they did some things with the Oompa Loompas. You remember them from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Every once in a while, that song will come into my head. Oompa Loompa doopity doo.
They used to scare me. I would cry when that happened as a kid.
They were made gender neutral in the new books.
I thought they were already all men.
In the movies, they were already all men. They were depicted all as men who looked exactly the same. In the books, there were female and young Oompa Loompas.
Oh.
But I only know this because I read before this podcast. I'm not like intimately familiar with the species of Oompa Loompas. But so in the original books, the Oompa Loompas were essentially like transatlantic slave traded. So apparently he said he went and like captured them from Africa and brought them over in the original, and they were like, and kept them there. And then they changed it to like a Kumbaya thing. So in the original, it said, "So I shipped them all over here, every man, woman, and child in the Oompa Loompa tribe." And then they changed it to, "So they all agreed to come over, each and every Oompa Loompa." They also in the original had, "It was easy. I smuggled them over in large packing cases with holes in them, and they all got here safely. They all speak English now." And they changed that to, "They've told me they love it here." And then in the original they had, "They still wear the same kind of clothes they wore in the jungle. They insist upon that." And they changed it to, "They do like jokes." So they're totally changing the meaning. They're not just tweaking the language. They're totally rewriting the story because apparently it's offensive that they were like, but again,
it's supposed to be offensive. Like, this is the whole point. And when you're writing these kinds of books, like, I would assume that the author's probably trying to draw attention to the fact that Willy Wonka is a creep and a bad guy, that trafficking and slavery is bad, that it is inhumane, and now you can't even mention that, right? It's not like this was portrayed as it was an okay thing that Willy Wonka did. Even in that verbiage itself, it makes him look terrible. That is, I mean, you are absolutely destroying this book, the meaning of the characters, the development of the story, and also just any kind of nods to history or lessons that he was attempting to teach through those parallels.
I agree completely. I think it's really messed up. I also will point out that it's not just people on the right who are upset about this, because conservatives or libertarians like us. It's actually getting tons of backlash. So the CEO of the very liberal-leaning, the literature organization PEN America, put out this long statement saying that at PEN America, we are alarmed by the hundreds of changes to venerated works of Roald Dahl in a purported effort to scrub the books of that what might offend some people. And she said something that I found really interesting. She said, "The problem with taking license to re-edit classic works is that there is no limiting principle. You start out wanting to replace a word here and a word there, and you end up inserting entirely new ideas, as has been done to Dahl's work. Literature is meant to be surprising and provocative," she says. "That's part of its potency. By setting out to remove any reference that might cause offense, you dilute the power of storytelling." She says, "Better than playing around with these texts is to offer introductory context that prepares people for what they're about to read and helps them understand the setting in which it was written." I agree with that completely.
Thank God there's still some actual real liberals left on the left, because she's exactly right. And I am terrified to think of what happens to our culture and to our history if this kind of trend continues. I grew up being homeschooled, and one of my favorite things was just how much we read. We read all kinds of novels and books, and I learned so much about our past and just about human nature and about how people have worked together throughout history. These are important things, and it's not always pleasant. A lot of what I would read would have, issues that my mom would have to talk to me about. I remember there was a slavery section we did, and a lot of the books included details about slaves being raped or families being broken apart, and that was awful. But you need to know that humans can do that to one another. You need to know that this happened. You need to be aware so that you can safeguard against it happening again. And I will say it makes a much bigger impact when you read this through a narrative, a story, than it would if you just merely read that in a history book. Because when you're getting to know the characters and you care about them, it leaves a lasting imprint on you. And if we start stripping our literature of these kinds of lessons, of these kinds of descriptions, we are going to be so much worse off. And I really like her suggestion of how you should navigate that as a parent, as a teacher. that is on you, right? To have these uncomfortable conversations with your children and to explain these things with them and to help them process that and learn about it, not to strip it all away, pretend that everything is hunky-dory and fine, to pretend that everything's just equal and beautiful. That it's ridiculous. That's not the real world, and it shouldn't be how we try to paint history either.